Hi guys, and welcome to another episode of Kabir Considers. In this video, I'm going to react to the world's fastest bomber, the XB-70 VALKYRIE. Now, that name just in itself sounds badass, doesn't it? The Valkyrie, you know? And when I think of fast bombers, I don't really know of many. I know of fast aircraft, obviously, you know, the Blackbird, and I know of bombers like the B-2, but to think of an actual, you know, a bomber that's meant to be rapid, I can't really name one. So this one here is going to be the first of this kind that I'm aware of. And I wonder what kind of speeds it can reach. It's got to be stuff like Mach 4, maybe even Mach 5. Just insanely fast. I'm eager to see what this thing is capable of. So let's do it.
This video was made possible by CuriosityStream. Watch thousands of high-quality documentaries and get access to my streaming service Nebula using the link in the description. In the fall of 1964, the Air Force begins testing a radical new machine that looks like it's come from outer space. It's one of the fastest aircraft to ever fly, a massive intercontinental bomber that can outrun any fighter jet. An aircraft so groundbreaking, it rides its own supersonic shockwave. It was going to be the future of America's bomber force, but efforts to develop such an advanced aircraft would be marred by tragedy.
They lose pilots. They must have lost pilots, right? Look at that, those 6 engines.
By the mid-1950s, tensions between the United States and the Soviet Union were reaching an all-time high. Both sides had strategic bombers that could fly halfway around the world to strike targets deep within enemy territory. The United States had developed a state-of-the-art all-jet bomber force. The newly introduced B-52 could carry large payloads over long distances, and the soon-to-be-introduced B-58 would dash to supersonic speeds. But in an all-out conflict, neither of these would really cut it against Soviet air defenses. While the B-52 could fly all the way to the Soviet Union, it flew too slow to stand a chance against the latest generation of Soviet interceptors. The supersonic B-58 could fly just as fast as any interceptor, but had limited range and payload. What the Air Force urgently needed was a new kind of plane, a heavy bomber fast enough to outrun anything the Soviets could throw at it. But
look at that side profile, man, it's so sleek.
In 1955, many doubted whether such a plane was even possible, because it would mean having to turn to some pretty radical solutions, like using nuclear power to extend an aircraft's range, or exotic high-energy fuels to boost the performance of jet engines. The most practical solution seemed to be an aircraft that would fly subsonically most of the way to its target before jettisoning the outer portions of its wings and fuel tanks to make a supersonic dash.
Wow.
But aviation technology in the 1950s progressed at a breakneck speed, with rapid advances in aerodynamics, engine performance, and exotic materials. And it meant the dash concept could be shelved in favor of a design that would cruise supersonically over its entire mission. So in 1957, the Air Force began development of a next-generation bomber. And the performance targets were ambitious. It would have to fly more than 3 times faster than the B-52, 25,000 feet higher, and have similar payload and range. And leading aircraft builders Boeing and North American Aviation were invited to compete on a design.
Looks expensive though. This ain't gonna be cheap.
Boeing and North American Aviation submitted radical concepts that looked similar on the surface. Both featured canards and slender delta wings optimized for supersonic flight. But Boeing was widely expected to win. After all, they had built the venerable B-52 and a series of iconic bombers during the Second World War. North American was the underdog, but during development, their engineers stumbled upon research that would give them a huge advantage.
Is it me, or does this one here really resemble Concorde? I can't be the only one seeing the resemblance here.
A little-known report that detailed a phenomenon called compression lift. When flying faster than the speed of sound, shockwaves typically travel away from an aircraft. But if they could be redirected underneath the wings, the shockwaves would help generate additional lift. Using this principle, North American's entry promised to fly more efficiently at high supersonic speeds. and the Air Force was impressed. To the shock of Boeing, in 1957, North American's design was selected for development. The new bomber would be given the name Valkyrie and designated as the B-70. Engineers used cutting-edge technologies to build a 260-ton bomber that could outrun a fighter jet. To make this feat possible, 6 afterburning turbojets were fed air through a sophisticated intake. The engines were optimized to run most efficiently at high supersonic speeds, and they were powerful enough so that even if one were to fail, the Valkyrie could still maintain Mach 3 and complete its mission. But clever aerodynamics were also key to performance, with compression lift giving the Valkyrie one of the highest lift-to-drag ratios of any manned aircraft. Variable geometry wings improved stability and enhanced compression lift. On takeoff and landings, they could be fully extended, at low supersonic speeds, angled downwards 25 degrees, and at multi-Mach speeds, a full 65.
I can already imagine that maintenance of this aircraft is going to be really expensive. Just because when you're operating at the cutting edge, the technologies haven't been driven down in price yet because it's still so new.
But flying at 3 times the speed of sound, kinetic heating on the airframe would be so intense it would soften conventional aircraft aluminum. So engineers developed a revolutionary fuselage skin and circulated fuel throughout the airframe to cool the aircraft's interior. Even at an altitude of 75,000 feet, the Valkyrie's cockpit was fully pressurized and featured an innovative encapsulated escape system. It meant that the bomber's crew of 4 wouldn't have to put on bulky flight suits, allowing a Valkyrie crew to get airborne in only 20 minutes. Capable of delivering a nuclear payload to anywhere in the world in just hours, the Valkyrie's performance was truly out of this world, and the bomber would embody America's strategy of deterrence through strength.
It does look phenomenal. It looks
The first
incredible.
experimental XB-70 prototype was unveiled in May of 1964, with flight testing to begin in the following months. And it would soon be joined by a second and third prototype, both already under construction. But from the start, it was clear that things wouldn't go so smoothly. During initial ground tests, there were so many technical problems, the first flight was delayed for months, while engineers sorted through a laundry list of issues. It wouldn't be until September 21st that the XB-70 was finally ready to make its first flight, and cheers could be heard as the space-aged bomber lifted off for the very first time. But celebrations were short-lived, because a hydraulic leak prevented the landing gear from retracting, and soon one of the engines surged, forcing a shutdown. As the prototype came back in for a landing, a brake locked up, causing a tire to blow out and catch fire. It seemed just as one problem was solved, more would emerge.
This is not what you want to see on a demo flight, you know? Oh my god, doesn't really fill you with confidence.
On October 12th, the XB-70 crossed the sound barrier for the very first time, just barely inching above Mach 1. But as flight tests continued, paint began peeling off the fuselage and control surfaces, and soon the aircraft looked like it had flown through a sandblaster. The paint was patched up and the XB-70 pushed on to higher speeds. But with each test flight, it seemed the faster it flew, the more serious the issues became. On its 12th test flight, as the prototype reached Mach 2.6, the horizontal splitter tore off and was sucked into the engine duct, knocking out 4 engines.
Oh my god.
The pilots landed safely, but all of the engines had to be replaced. Finally, on October 14th, the aircraft was cleared to reach Mach 3. But just 2 minutes in, a large portion of the wing's leading edge broke off, forcing yet another emergency landing.
I mean, this to me just shows that the design, the overall design was massively flawed. Obviously, I'm not, you know, this was designed in the 50s. They had way less technology than we have now, fair play. But, I mean, should an aircraft have this many problems still in the demo phase?
From that point on, the first prototype was limited to flying at no more than Mach 2.5. In developing such a state-of-the-art aircraft, there were bound to be setbacks.
That's true.
But there was a much bigger problem looming over the program. From the very start, there were serious doubts about whether the Valkyrie would really be safe from Soviet air defenses, because surface-to-air missiles introduced in the mid-1950s were quickly becoming the most effective way to guard airspace. And by the 1960s, the Soviet Union had thousands of them, which could hit targets beyond even the XB-70's altitude. The introduction of ICBMs in the late 1950s also meant that nuclear warheads could now be delivered much more quickly and economically. In the span of just a few years, missile technology had rendered the world's most advanced bomber virtually obsolete. With the XB-70's strategic value in serious question, engineers scrambled for ways to keep the plane relevant, sketching out radical concepts to repurpose the bomber into a missile launcher, an aerial launch platform for spacecraft, or even a supersonic aerial refueler. Even more outlandish was a proposal that would turn the bomber into a Mach 3 supersonic transport.
That would be cool. That would be cool. So it's basically like Concorde before Concorde.
But these concepts proved to be a bridge too far, and the program was dramatically scaled back, eventually reduced down to a bare minimum research project involving just 2 aircraft. But with millions already spent on development, the program pushed forward, and in 1966, NASA joined the Air Force in flight testing, using the prototypes to gather valuable research into supersonic flight. By that point, the second prototype had proven to be a much more capable plane. On May 19, 1966, it reached speeds beyond Mach 3, demonstrating its ability to cruise at 3 times the speed of sound for over 30 minutes. After nearly a decade of development, one of the world's most ambitious aircraft was finally living up to expectations.
Showing some promise.
But tragedy would strike just weeks later.
Oh, no.
On June 8th, the second prototype was joined by 4 other aircraft for a formation flying photo op. But minutes into the flight, without warning, one of the trailing aircraft collided with the XB-70, instantly destroying it and severely damaging the Valkyrie's vertical stabilizers. For 16 seconds, the Valkyrie continued flying straight and level before spiraling back to Earth. In a matter of seconds, 2 test pilots and a billion-dollar aircraft were tragically lost.
Oh my God.
It was a
But couldn't the pilots eject? Why couldn't they eject their seats?
devastating setback for the program, and it meant NASA and the Air Force would have to continue research with the much less capable original prototype. The XB-70 was an engineering marvel, and while it never joined America's bomber force, it still had a profound impact on the Cold War. Because in 1955, when the Soviet Union learned that the Americans were developing a supersonic long-range bomber,
they built their own.
They scrambled to develop an equivalent, and it would end up as one of the most fearsome-looking aircraft ever built.
Oh, look at that.
But looks can be deceiving. In an effort to match the Americans, the Soviets ended up producing an embarrassing failure, one that they would keep hidden for decades. You can learn more about the M50's dramatic failure in my latest video, available right now on Nebula. Nebula is where you can watch more mustard videos, like my video.
Really fascinating. It's such a shame that nothing really came of the XB-70, although I would guess that some of the technologies conceptualized back then probably made their way into a lot of the aircraft we have now. You know, I'm willing to bet that, you know, we've got, or at least the US has probably got bombers that are just as fast now. You know, maybe not just as fast, maybe just below, but you know, because if this was designed in the 50s, over 70 years has passed. There either has to be, or there's stuff in the works. Like, for example, the SR-72. I'm not sure if that's going to have payload capabilities or if it's just going to be a surveillance plane, a reconnaissance. But yeah, hopefully the technology developed in the XB-70 hasn't been completely abandoned. Thanks for watching, guys, and I'll see you in the next one.